Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here with Rebecca Schulz, Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, and Minister Jean, Minister of Energy and Minerals. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Only about an hour ago, Ottawa released details of its oil and gas production cap. It is not an emissions cap, it is a production cap. This cap violates Canada's Constitution. Section 92A clearly gives provinces exclusive jurisdiction, may I say that again, exclusive jurisdiction over non-renewable natural resource development, and yet this cap will require a production cut of an estimated 1 million barrels per day by 2030 and 2.1 million barrels per day by 2035, according to S&P Global. We will continue to defend our province and our constitutional rights. We will also continue to defend the livelihoods of the estimated 150,000 workers nationwide who will lose their jobs as a result of this cap. We will continue to defend the families all across this country who will be left with $419 per month less to be able to pay for groceries and mortgage payments and utilities. We will continue to defend Albertans and Canadians who rely on revenues from oil and gas to pay for the public services that they desperately need, including healthcare, education, law, justice services, roads and bridges. To give you an idea, 1 million barrels a day of lost production at an average rate would cost us in royalties anywhere from $3 billion to $7 billion per year. To put that into context, we spend $2.2 billion on roads and bridges. It would wipe out our entire roads and bridges budget. We spend $3.2 billion supporting assured income for the severely handicapped. It would wipe out that entire program. We spend $2.5 billion on post-secondary for their operating budgets. Again, it would wipe out that entire program. The losses to GDP mean $28 billion will disappear from the Alberta economy, and nationally, $97 billion. Those losses put public services at risk, not only here, but also at the federal level and through the transfers to other provinces. Ultimately, this cap will lead Alberta and our country into economic and societal decline. And once again, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is putting reckless policy ahead of the needs and concerns of everyday Canadians. I made note that he would do this on his way out the door. It's like a bad renter who's burning the furniture on their way out. He needs to call an election now to seek a mandate to do this not only to our province but to the country. Once again, Ottawa is putting up roadblocks instead of providing solutions to global energy security. And make no mistake, Alberta and Canada have the ability to provide security to the world. Instead, Justin Trudeau continues to choose to outsource that duty to provide safe, affordable, reliable, and responsibly produced oil and gas to dictators and less clean producers around the world. And tweaks won't work. This cap must be scrapped. As the Business Council of Canada said earlier today, and I quote, imposing an oil and gas emissions cap will only make Canadians poorer. Strong climate action requires a strong economy. The cap will leave us neither. A de facto cap on oil and gas production would restrict cross-border energy trade and harm our shared economic and security interests. Albertans and all Canadians can rely on our government to actively explore the use of every legal option, including a constitutional challenge and the use of the Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act. We will not stand idly by while Justin Trudeau sacrifices our prosperity, our Constitution, and our quality of life for his extreme agenda. With that, I'd be happy to take questions.
Thanks, Premier. We have time for a few questions this morning. It'll be one question, one follow-up. Please state your name and outlet for the record, and we'll start here in person. We'll go with the phones. Morgan, go ahead.
Premier, I'm just wondering what you expect a timeline would be if you were, and do you plan to take this to court? Because we just were hearing, I think it was last week, we talked about the carve-outs, and that took a year for you to take to judicial court.
Well, as soon as possible. I mean, I'll get my Justice Minister working on it immediately, and we'll start drafting a motion under the Sovereignty Act immediately as well. So we're going to act very quickly.
And then in Ottawa, Minister Guilbeault said, let me pull up the quote, speaking about your government, they will continue doing stupid things and we will continue doing things to help Canadians. What is your response?
Absolutely not. He is not helping Canadians. He is harming Canadians. 150,000 job losses, the loss of production, which means the loss of revenue, not only for us, but for the rest of the country. An increase in cost on every family's budget to the tune of $419 per month, each and every month. This is not responsible policy. This is a vendetta. Like, he has a deranged vendetta against Alberta. It's very obvious. We've been watching it for some time. He's trying to find a way to get around what the Constitution says. He even acknowledged that they are not permitted to do a production cap because it is natural resources fall under provincial jurisdiction. Somehow he thinks he's going to sneak one in and we won't notice and the rest of the country won't notice. Well, we've noticed, and we think the courts will notice. He cannot do this.
Anyone else? Jen?
You sound angry. Why are you emotional about this?
I'm pissed. I'm absolutely angry. Because we've been working with these guys for 2 years, because we have a plan that would reduce emissions responsibly by 2050. And they continue to act like they're working collaboratively with us, and then they come out with exactly the same policy that they put forward a year ago, with no changes whatsoever, and then they're trying to mislead the public about its intent. And mislead the public about our true record. In 2018, we had 159.3 megatons of emissions from our oil and gas sector. In 2022, the most recent stats available, 158.3 megatons. So he is not even telling the truth. We are seeing an increase in production and a decrease in emissions, exactly like we said we would, because we're relying on technology. We're also going to know that we can decrease global emissions by getting more of our cleaner burning oil and natural gas to the world. They know that. We've told them that. The public knows that. And yet they persist in this pathway, which will harm our province and harm the country. And that is not acceptable. Not for a government that is at, what, 20% in the polls? Not for a government that is on its way out the door. It cannot destroy the most important industry in the country by targeting our province with this kind of unilateral action. We just won't stand for it.
And Guilbeault said today that the oil and gas sector has done less than most other sectors to reduce its emissions, its carbon footprint. So how much do you agree with that statement?
He's wrong. Minister Schulz will tell you, we set an aggressive target to reduce methane emissions 45%. By 2025. We achieved that target early. And we have all kinds of proposals that have come forward. We've got Dow Chemical with their net zero petrochemical plan, which is going to decarbonize the petrochemical industry. We've got Air Products with their net zero hydrogen facility, which will create a new form of fuel, not only for home heating and transportation, but also potentially for electricity generation. We have Heidelberg that is working towards a final investment decision for net zero cement, which will decarbonize cement, which is the second most traded commodity in the world. All of that is happening right here in Alberta. We have the Pathways Project, which just started a pathway to get to net zero by 2050. We have Capital Power and others who are looking at ways that they can bring nuclear into our province, which takes time to be able to develop the regulatory process and get approvals. We have seen dramatic improvement on the part of our largest producers because they're investing in technology. Technology takes time. You cannot snap your fingers and say it has to be done by 2026. You cannot snap your fingers and say it has to be done even by 2030 or 2035. The only way to achieve these unrealistic targets is to shut in our production. I know it, they know it, we're calling them out on it, and they have to stop it.
Jonathan?
Hi, Jonathan Bradley, Western Standard. So my questions are on an off-topic matter. So Women and Gender Equality and Youth Minister Marcy Eames said she has deep concerns of the gender identity bills you're bringing forward. What do you think about that?
Well, look, I mean, I haven't read her letter. I know that she has sent it, and you know, I will look it over and I'll respond to her. But we know what we're doing is to protect kids, to protect their right to make their own choices as adults on changes to their body that are just going to foundationally change their ability to have kids. That's an adult decision, and so we're just giving them the time to be able to grow up and be able to make those kinds of decisions. That's the spirit that is put forward in.
Okay. Ian has requested a meeting with you about the gender identity bills. Will you take the meeting with her? Why or why not?
Again, I'll have to have a look at her letter. I'm not planning on being in Ottawa anytime soon. I don't know if she's planning on being out here. I think she's an Ontario MP, but I'll read her letter and we'll give a response.
Next. Emmanuel?
Yeah, Stephen Guilbeault also said that basically you, Pierre Poilievre, and Scott Moe don't believe in climate change. What do you have to say to that?
That is just absolute nonsense. And he continues to say such things because he's trying to demonize our province, and he's trying to demonize our sector, and he's trying to justify unconstitutional policy. And it's absolutely unacceptable. We expect our national leaders to engage in nation building as opposed to nation destruction. And that is what they are doing by having a particular type of emissions cap targeted to our particular industry that is going to impact our particular province for no other reason than to be vindictive. And that's what's got to stop. We have always said that we are prepared to work with the federal government, and we have worked with them on the Dow Chemical Project, on the Air Products Project, on the Heidelberg Project. And so there is absolutely no justification for this other than because they think they can get away with it, and they can't.
So you think, and I quote, that it's a deranged vendetta? You don't think it's for the common good, for fighting climate change?
Absolutely not. If he was working towards the common good, he would be working with us on a strategy to reduce emissions over time by 2050 so that we can make sure that we're adopting the best available technology, giving the time for the industry to develop that, develop the market so that we can export our product to reduce emissions nationwide. Heck, if we were to reduce the reliance China has on coal-fired plants with our clean-burning LNG, just 20% conversion of their coal plants would be net zero for Canada. It would remove the equivalent of the same amount of emissions of our entire country. Those are the kind of things that he should be focused on, and instead he's trying to shut down our industry, and we see it.
Minister of Environment for China, Minister of Environment for Canada.
Well, he's on a national panel in China that he went to a year ago. He seems to think it's okay for China to have a 2060 target and for him to engage in advising them, meanwhile asking us to achieve unachievable emissions targets. He should be putting Canada first. He should be putting Alberta as a province first, and he's not.
Thanks, Premier. We have time for a few more questions. We're going to jump to the phones. Operator, first caller, please.
Your first question comes from the line of Rick Bell from Post Media. Please go ahead.
Question for the Premier. We all know what a court challenge looks like. Some of us are not quite as familiar with what exactly a Sovereignty Act move would look like. You say your Justice Minister is preparing a possible motion to present to the legislature. What would the Sovereignty Act do differently than what a court challenge would do? We know what a court challenge looks like. What would a Sovereignty Act resolution do that would be stronger than a court challenge?
Well, you'll have to wait and see. We've got a number of different policies that we're looking at, but I can tell you, when I got elected, the first thing I did was to read the volume written on the Alberta History series of Peter Lougheed's battles with Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau. And I will recall, we won that one because, and that was even before we had the entrenchment of natural resources in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That was because we had the 1930 Natural Resources Act. We have always fought back against a federal government that is trying to unfairly target our production and target our industry. And we've won in the past. We've won recently with Bill C-69. We have won with the plastics ban, and we believe we'll win again. So we'll make sure that the Sovereignty Act is to put up a shield, to send the signal that we intend to fully protect our area of constitutional jurisdiction, and we'll put the details in how we intend to do that when that motion comes forward.
And my supplementary, again, on the Sovereignty Act, because I think a lot of people are unclear about it, would in whatever way you draft a Sovereignty Act thing, is the Sovereignty Act basically the end result of however you phrase the Sovereignty Act move? Is it to make sure that this emission cap does not come into force in Alberta? Is that sort of the end game with a Sovereignty Act move?
Well, look, think of it as a notwithstanding clause on illegal federal action. The federal government does not have the right to legislate in our area of jurisdiction any more than I have the right to legislate in their area of jurisdiction. So we're putting up a notwithstanding clause saying you're not going to be able to do this because this is our jurisdiction, and we'll put the details into how we intend to fully defend our jurisdiction when we bring that motion forward.
Great, thanks. Operator, next caller, please.
Your next question is from the line of Emma Graney from the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead.
Yeah, g'day, Premier. Thanks for taking my questions. So when you're talking there about the production cut and the notion of job losses and stuff, and you are citing some reports from Deloitte and S&P, but those reports kind of looked at a business as usual scenario. They didn't take into account the fact companies are already moving on emissions reduction activities, including CCUS. And in fact, the Feds say today that their own analyses say that production will actually increase by 16%. So how is there such a glaring gap between their numbers and yours on this?
Look, 2050 is a reasonable target. The minister said that this comes into effect 2026, which is less than a year and a half away. There is no progress that anyone can make in adopting new technology in 14, 15 months. That's what we know to be true. We know that if you want to see technological advancement, you have to give enough time for capital turnover, the development of best available technology, and then each new incremental iteration develops lower and lower emissions. That's why you need to have a long enough time frame. He also acknowledged no one else in the world is doing this. That should tell him something. And so if you take an approach that is going to make Canadian oil and gas uncompetitive, guess who that benefits? That benefits Venezuela and Iran and every other country in the world that doesn't have these unreasonable restrictions. So you can put it into a computer model all you want. In the real world, we know what it means. In the real world, it'll put a chill on investment and it will result in production being kept in the ground. And that is exactly what they are trying to do. No matter how they try to use weasel words to say otherwise, we know exactly what they're trying to do, and we just aren't going to stand for it.
And so the Feds say that, a lot of these reductions will be able to be met, though, through reducing methane, for example, something your government supports, as well as carbon capture, which are both items that you guys are pretty gung-ho on, actually. So, what is essentially the problem if companies are doing this anyway?
Time
Why
frame.
not just encourage them to go faster?
Time frame. You simply, technology gets adopted in the time it takes to develop the technology. You can't just plug it into a computer model and assume it exists in the real world. You have to let the technologies develop. You have a period of time that it has to be adopted. That can't happen by 2026. Probably, and it certainly can't happen by 2030 or 2035. We think it's possible that you can develop a framework for small modular reactors. You can roll them out. You can develop and build a pipeline for CCUS. You can improve the technology for capture and storage, but you have to take the time to do that. If you try to put arbitrary, punitive restrictions in place before the technology is available, all that you can do to meet the target is to shut in production, and they know that, and we know that. This is nothing but smoke and mirrors. They're trying to do something which they are not allowed to do under our Constitution. They are not allowed to cap our production, and we're not going to let them.
We have time for one more question. Operator, last caller, please.
Your next question comes from the line of Chris from the Calgary Herald. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. You mentioned at the beginning that a court challenge could be possible here, and I'm wondering what groundwork has already been done to launch a court challenge. How long would it take for you to launch it? And what other steps are you already looking at outside of a sovereignty challenge or a legal challenge?
Well, look, we knew that this was coming, and we knew that Stephen Guilbeault didn't matter what we were putting in front of him, that he was bent on going in this direction. So we've been preparing for a legal challenge for some time. It's why we also did our $7 million ad campaign to let the rest of the country know just how damaging these actions were. And so we're going to continue on with developing a motion in the legislature that we'll put forward that will detail some additional steps that we're doing. We had hoped that they might see reason. We had hoped with their cratering poll results, with the fact that the NDP has stopped supporting them, we had hoped that they wouldn't try to create this much damage on the way out. But you'll recall, this is exactly what I predicted would happen, that knowing that they're headed to defeat, they are trying to cause as much damage as possible. And the rest of the country should not let that happen. Their Liberal MPs should not let that happen. If they're wondering why they might not win their seat the next election, it's because of actions like this. The NDP has not supported them. They've even relented on a carbon tax because of things like this. They know that this is an affordability crisis that this government is creating, and they are just bent on causing as much damage as possible. That's why we've got to put up a shield, and we just won't let it happen.
Chris, do you have a follow-up?
Premier, just as a follow-up, how does this impact the ongoing talks between your government, the federal government, and the Pathways Group of oil sands producers to move ahead on the CCUS project when the draft regulations have now come out that you obviously are opposed to?
Well, it's a very good question, isn't it? How are you supposed to participate in good faith with a partner who hammers you over the head when your back is turned? That's how we feel today. We've been sitting with them, having regular bilateral meetings throughout the course of the last year and a half, as I committed to doing. And every single time, Stephen Guilbeault comes out and he comes up with a bludgeon. And so how are we supposed to have some meaningful conversations to work together on a shared purpose? I think he's destroyed the trust. And so I'll have to consult with my ministers about how we pick things up from here.
Okay, thanks everyone. That concludes our press conference today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.